for the Shop Report with
Barbershop Jay.
What up, sports fans? Welcome to the Shop Report. I'm Barbershop Jay. I'll be your host for the day. Here's what's happening. If you're up and around, you're out and about, and you want to give us a shout, that number to call is area code 267-687-0026. I'm sorry, this is being pre-recorded. I'm so used to giving out the call-in number. My bad for all my listeners and viewers and such out there. Let me repeat that. There are no call-ins today, even though I was getting ready to give out the call-in number. But I will say the Shop Report, of course, is now being brought to you by none other than the fine folks over at Rocket Digital Media. If you find yourself in need of services such as marketing consulting, media production, or social media advertising, and a host of other digital services, you can hop on over to their Facebook fan page at RDM Detroit. Once again, that's at RDM Detroit, or you can go to their website, rocketdigital.net. That's ROCKIT digital.net, and make sure you tell them the BSJ sent you. Joining me on the P-Rogram today is none other than my cat from the NYC. Excuse me. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, this is not going well. Brother Rich is not with us just yet. I thought he was calling in. I saw a number pop up. I thought that was him, and I was going to segue him right on in. But anyway, we're going to go to my man up north, Joey James, a.k.a. Double J. Tell the people what you say, seeing how you're the only one who wanted to show up today.
I want to say bullseye. A big rest in peace to Larry Clisby, the great Larry Clisby, who was the voice of Purdue basketball and football for 42 years, and passed away from cancer over the weekend. So definitely want to give him a much deserved shout out.
Oh, absolutely. I saw that posted or whatnot, and I'm not even familiar with the guy. I guess what you call that, an unsung hero, so to speak, or I'm not even sure. But again, to any and all the folks out there associated with, or to this man's family and those who loved and knew him, we definitely send our condolences, man. This COVID, and I'm not saying I don't want to make the connection that this man passed from COVID, because a lot of people are doing that. I'm just saying in general, we just seem to see an enormous fallout, if you would, from this whole COVID and all of the stuff associated with it. And, the stuff that's going on in the country, the Capitol and, the presidency and, Biden taking over and 45 being ousted, so to speak. It's just been a lot going on. 2020 and 2021 so far looks like they'll both be years to remember. Forget-me-nots, as they like to say. Yeah. But until we get Brother Rich or D Gully in, Double J, it's just you and I. So before we get into the meat of, or the majority of what we're going to discuss here today, because I put together a nice little lineup, I think, I want to ask this question. Player empowerment. Now, the NBA has this player empowerment, of course, primarily due to guaranteed contracts. But Double J, are we starting to see the beginnings of a trend being set in the NFL, in particular with the quarterback position?
Oh, without a doubt. It's quite a difference in what you're seeing by league, and I think it is, at the very least, you could say it's eye-opening to the general fan, if you will. And even more so, you can dissect it by depending on where the viewership or the beholder would be, because again, you could look at this in multiple lights and try to determine if this is a good or bad thing, quote unquote, for business.
Yeah, and see, I guess that's the question. That's the $1 million question. Okay, with that being said, then, is it a good thing in your estimation, or is it a bad thing for business? And in this case, who is the business? Is it good or bad for the business of the NFL, or is it good or bad for the business of the individual player or quarterback? And of course, we already know we talking throw them all in the bag. The Carson Wentz, the Russell Wilson, the Deshaun Watson, the Mitch Trubisky, even though I don't really hear his name, Tua Tagovailoa. All these guys are being mentioned in possible or potential trades with some of the other guys who are more, household names, if you would. So who's it good for or bad for in terms of business?
Well, that's a very interesting point because, again, this isn't the traditional snow globe, if you will, where someone, in the past when I would say the past 20, 30 years, you could easily shake that snow globe. It was such a controlled environment that the stance that you felt, and again, this is from an up high perspective, that you felt was best for business would ultimately be able to be echoed without you publicly having to say anything. And it would kind of be kept behind closed doors, et cetera. Instead, what we're seeing, and this is where it gets very interesting when it comes to your favorite, LeBron James. Because
boy.
We've seen where Michael Jordan stood when it came to these things, when issues arose in years past. He has since, as a retired individual, but yet still has an affiliation, of course, to the NBA, beyond just apparel, because of his ownership rights of the Hornets. He has since kind of changed, pivoted from that original stance. So right now, regardless if you want to say it's from the side of the business side, what we considered political side, you incorporate the individual brands involved, the spiderweb effect or ripple effect of the brands associated with them. Then you take it an even greater step to the individual players, like you mentioned with the quarterback position, being more vocal about what they want, but yet on the surface, and this is where it always gets very interesting because we haven't really heard this part of it yet, is that when you look at such a fixed salary cap that is really, really on display within the NFL, and the disparity in wages between the quarterback position and everything else, I've been on record as saying I would probably underpay at that position intentionally, because it seems like the successful model generally is when you can put a better team or more complete team around a future star. Hence the concept of these drafting quarterbacks in the top 10 and winning a Super Bowl, or at least appearing in one, before their contract, the rookie contract expires. So there's a lot of elements at play here that to truly dissect this thing.
Okay, so my question, here's another one for you then. In large part, players' salaries are paid based on a salary cap, right? A collective amounts of money the league doles out, so to speak, that each team can use to sign players, so on and so forth, right?
That's right.
Okay. So the owners of these professional sports franchises are worth 5 to 6 to 7 times as much as what their athletes are being paid. I'm just saying theoretically, in your opinion, could the salary cap be raised? In other words, what determines the salary cap? Because, again, what the owners have or what the owners are worth, especially in regards to TV monies and contracts and so on and so forth, let's say, again, this is all in theory, let's say what the owners are worth combined with the TV contracts is, let's just say $600 billion. I'm just throwing a number out there. Of that $600 billion, we're going to do 2% of that or whatever it is, and then from that 2%, all the players in the league get paid. If we look at all of the monies from the owner side and the TV contract side and all those other merchandise, all those other things, shouldn't they go back and look at it and say, okay, what the salary cap number is, whatever the cap is, that number needs to be increased. Because it's not in terms of weight, or it pales in comparison to what the people who are not playing or in all those other entities are drawing in. And haven't they, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they not increase the salary cap in the NFL a couple years ago? Or at the last CBA or something to that effect?
Yeah, and that you're highlighting a couple of good points. With the owner, the trouble with viewing it from that perspective of what the owners are worth. The problem is there isn't consistency within that figure. Because many of the teams are ownership groups, so as it sounds, a collective of individuals versus a singular. That right away changes the value of some teams. In full transparency, you can see that occasionally in a number of different examples with how certain teams run operationally. It's kind of that same top-down approach. Now, regarding the actual salary cap itself, as you pointed out, there is a collective bargaining agreement. So this is a figure that is agreed upon by both parties, usually because, I think if memory serves me correct, both the NBA and the NFL recently redid theirs. So one of the challenges is that a lot of it stems off of, in 2020, thankfully, what really put a bullseye on what makes these companies go. And, in the past, they kept talking about the television revenue and those types of deals being what really increased or decreased a number. But at the same time, what we learned from last season across the board is that the ticket revenues, the gate fees, and concessions, all of those things that are done on site, made up a larger percentage than I believe anybody would have expected. Because again, it's a varying number, but it was between 40 and 60%, which was shocking. It was very eye-opening for me because we hear what figure is represented by the TV deal. But then again, you have to also take into consideration that that's split amongst each team.
Yeah.
Then you break it down even more, as you pointed out with popularity, Jerry's World versus the Q. Again, two very different experiences, two very different price points.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, I don't know when the next NFL CBA is set to come up or set to expire or whatever the case may be. But with this whole idea of, this quarterback, this NFL quarterback, it's a sudden rash of guys possibly going to be on the move. I think this upcoming season, after all is said and done, we will have seen something unprecedented in the NFL and in particular at the quarterback position. But again, I say, to me, when it comes to the monies and who gets what and how much and so on and so forth, it seems as if those like, here, I can make $100. I own the product. I can make 100, and of that 100, I'm going to give you 79 cents. No, how about of that 100? If you're the player, you say, well, wait a minute, and I get that the gate is not where it once was because of COVID or whatnot, and that we talked about that I think on previous broadcasts about the percentages, and the fan experience and whatnot, and what, and when we talked about it. We talked about it because at the end of the day, a lot of people were being dismissive about the fans and what the fans bring to the table. Who are the fans? They're not important. Of course, a time or two when Russell Westbrook, got into a few excursions or, a few of the other players got into things, with fans or whatnot. And people were like, man, who cares about the fans? But you see now, due to COVID and the fans not being there, they're starting to let more fans back in now. And I think the further along we get, they'll allow more fans to be back in. At what point we get full capacity, I don't know. That could still be another year or two maybe away from now. But you see how important the fan and the gate, quote unquote, money is to the bottom line, so to speak. But again, I still say what the cap, however you go about doing it, the cap needs to be, and I don't even know what the cap number is right now for the NFL, but it needs to be, they need to increase it. They do. So then we won't have these questions about, what the market is for a quarterback, in particular Dak's case, and going back and forth, is he worth $40 million and what not, $39 million and so on and so forth. It's tough, as I tell people, it's tough for me to have that conversation with people about what I think a player is worth when I've been on I've been on the other side, so to speak, when it comes to ownership and whatnot. When I heard Randy Lerner, who was a former owner of the Browns before he sold it to Haslam, I'm saying to myself, we bash players and talk about what a player is or is not worth, but we give no thought or consideration to the guy who's able to pay him what he's worth. Now, some people say, well, that one ain't got nothing to do with the other. Yeah, well, I mean, all right, if you want to split hairs, okay, so be it. But I can't have that conversation about a player and what he's worth without giving thought to the others, what the guy who can pay him what he's raking in. Like I've said.
Well, if that were the case, everyone would hate Stan Kroenke.
Yeah, well, right, but no, what? Yeah, well, of course. And all I'm saying, when it comes to management or ownership, what I'm driving at is, for the players, this is their livelihood. Now, the average Joe will look at the amount of money a player makes and say, yeah, he ain't worth this or he ain't worth that, because they're making millions. I get it. But it's a reason why we all in different tax brackets. However, when you look at it from an ownership standpoint, the guy who owns a professional sports franchise is equivalent to you and I owning a PlayStation. It's a toy for them. These guys were sitting up on their yachts or wherever it is that they smoke the big Havanas. You know what? I think I'm going to buy me a team today. Yeah, Bill, you do that. I'm trying to tell you. Meanwhile, the guy who's playing, and at some point, either I'm going to try to get Herm back on the show because he's still kind of very, very busy, or I'll sit down and do a one-on-one with him, and then I'll play it back for the people to listen. He said, you'd be surprised that it's only, a handful of guys in the NFL who are really making dough, so to speak. But 2/3 of the guys in the NFL are making chump change by NFL standards. You see them now? If it was by Barbershop J standards, that's a whole lot. I'd take that in a heartbeat. You get what I'm saying? But by NFL standards, they're making chump change. And Herm once told me, and forgive me, Herm, I know you're out there listening. I don't want to mess this up, so it's not exactly verbatim. But Herm told me once, he said, man, you'd be surprised for the guy that's making the league minimum. Well, I don't know what the league minimum is now, but at one point in time, the league minimum was under $1 million. He said, man, after you get done paying your agent, and whatever city you play in, you get done paying that city's taxes, and so on and so forth. He said, it's almost like for the average worker, when you go punch a clock, do 8 hours, 40 hours a week, somebody else dips their hand in it and gives you what's left. He said, if you really knew what was by the time we get done doling out whatever we making, he said, but whatever we get left, he said, you'd be surprised, man. He said, that's why guys sometimes have other things, it'd be them endorsements and things, that's kind of like a filler or help, bridge the gap, so to speak. But I don't know. At the end of the day, man, I just feel like they really need to increase the cap monies so that players all across the board, even the lower end guy, will get far more than what he's getting right now. Because we look at that number. Oh, this guy he's getting he signed a 1-year deal for $1.5 million. Yeah, but that's not what he's taking home. You understand what I'm saying? That's not what he's taking home. But guess what Jerry Jones is taking home? Guess what Stan Kroenke is taking home? Guess what the folks that own CBS is taking home? You know, so for me, that whole conversation about whether a player is worth it or not, you know, when I get to thinking, when I'm asked that question, my thoughts go directly to the other side, and I say, yeah, every player is worth whatever they're asking for. Now that's separate from, in my opinion, whether I think a guy is a good player or not a good player. You know what I mean? But you know, as far as if that's what the market is saying, then get yours, young fella. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. So let's look at it in the terms of this, because as you pointed out, I love the example that you used with, as vivid as that is, to say, you know, smoking a Cuban cigar on a particular yacht.
Yeah, exactly.
And just throwing it, saying we're just throwing money into the wind. And so with that in mind, these are deemed, as much as they're toys, unlike the way that somebody would buy a car that would depreciate with value. They're expecting it to appreciate and increase in value over time. Generally, you just seen it with the sale of the Utah Jazz. What that was at the time, I believe it was 21 years ago. They had purchased the team, so just after that Malone and Stockton run. I'm sure at that point, the sellers at that point in time probably thought that was an all-time high, versus what the gentleman, the tech guy that bought it, what he paid for it was astronomically higher. I think it was, again, basically 100% on top of what the original payment was 20 years prior. So now, when it comes to determining that cap, though, as much as that's a toy, it's meant to make them money. So that cap, it's based off of total revenue. So I brought up before that huge number that you hear when it comes to TV deals. In addition to that, I brought up some of the other factors that are different, that are going to vary amongst teams, which is, ticket revenues. And basically, it's total revenue. So as the example here, if a team took in $500 million in a season, it might define the cap as 70% of the total revenue. So again, you're going to take that 0.7 by $500 million, which will give you $350. So to your point about that owner sitting up high, that as long as there is a season that is played, chances are they're not taking a real loss. Because, again, that breakdown that I used between that 40% of gate fees, et cetera, things that in a pandemic would go away, you're still covered on the back end from the 60%. So you may not make a typical year's revenue. You may not make anywhere near $500 million. But regarding that $350 that you had to pay for your team that year, and potentially all of the workers involved, because you didn't furlough them like a jerk, that's where you would still at very least come out ahead. They do it on purpose to protect their investment and really protect the league, most importantly. I brought up how the MLS has a slush fund, and FIFA has a slush fund, and basically they're protecting themselves. The reason why MLS in its infancy does not have promotion and relegation like you see globally is because for these owners that are buying in at $150 million minimum, they have to make sure that they can make their money back first before they say, okay, let's do the greater good thing here that is uniform with the rest of the world. So to your point about, is Dak Prescott worth $40 million, or is this gentleman worth this or that? And as Herm pointed out, whatever that number is, first of all, is it guaranteed money? Secondly,
right,
minimum 2% of that is going to your agent or who represents you that actually put that contract together. As you pointed out, following that, of that select sum, the city of Detroit has a blank tax. Then the state has a blank tax. Unless you're playing in Florida, and that was one of the selling points to some of the Florida teams, is that they had no state tax. This is why you can get away with certain things in certain markets. And as you pointed out, where the real money is made for a player is actually on the endorsement side, because those checks are written directly to the player. versus, hey, you have to do all these incentive-based things and performance-based things to earn a living. They highlighted that when the gentleman, the receiver for the Seahawks, Russ went and threw him the ball a couple extra times so he could make a couple extra $100,000.
Right.
Because, again, that was a performance-based incentive. So if you look at it from both ends, the challenging part, and this is where really the league would be, the fan base and the players lose, is when they point fingers that I'm standing next to the $40 million man. Think Ted DiBiase here.
Yeah.
and meanwhile, I'm still driving, a Honda Accord, and we're not winning.
You know what?
Go
ahead, finish.
But again, you're giving them pennies in just to put it in perspective. It's done from a business standpoint, but at the same time, it's easy for fans and players of teams to point the fingers at the guy that is bringing in the income, the lion's share of the income. And this is where I believe in seeing this musical chairs or carousel of quarterbacks here, unlike anything we've ever seen before, could very well be a tipping point. That may go a different direction.
I think so too. You mentioned the increase in value when talking about owners purchasing the team, or versus the decrease. When we buy things, a car or such, it decreases in value. Whereas these guys buy an NFL or professional sports franchise with the idea for it to increase in value. Let me give you something here, and I'm going to talk about the Browns. This is why I'm anti-establishment when it comes to this whole monetary or compensatory ideology or conversation. On October 16th, 2012, the NFL owners unanimously approved Jimmy Haslam III's acquisition of the Cleveland Browns from owner Randy Lerner for a U.S. $1 billion. Two things. Well, let me finish. Cleveland Browns and Aston Villa owner Randy Lerner is set for a U.S. $1 billion plus windfall after agreeing, of course, to a deal that sees James Haslam III take the Browns off his hands. I've mentioned this before about Haslam. This is what I mean. A professional sports franchise to these guys who can afford them, it's like the toy you got from 12 Christmases ago. It's just somewhere in the box. It's not that big a deal to them. They're dismissive. He, Lerner, said himself the only reason that he kept the Browns for as long as he did was because he made a promise to his father. In other words, he was not invested or vested in the Cleveland Browns, as are Browns fans who are vested and die hard and bleed brown and orange and, and things of that nature. That's why I tell Browns fans all the time, I'm a Browns fan till I die. I say, man, but the guy who run the team, he could care less about you and anything else. You know what I mean? So can we get some perspective? And then second, let me give you, and here's what I mean. And I've always asked this question to diehard Browns fans. I call it blind fandom. There's nothing wrong with fandom, but at what point is reality going to get a seat at the table? You explain to me, Double J, you're more of a numbers guy. You're a marketing guy, okay? You understand that lingo and that business and that arena much better than I do. We're talking about a product and whether or not, what gives you the incentive to purchase a product if you're the fan, right? So explain to me. I'm talking about economics 101. The Browns' previous 3 years prior to the sale to Haslam, let me tell you what their record was. In 2009, they were 5-11. In 2010, 5-11. In 2011, they were 4-12. I'm not going to even tell you what they were in 2012, the year, of course, that Haslam bought the team. So help me to understand something. You, of course, being the numbers guy. How is it that a product that was that paltry, or, for lack of a better word or term, putrid, how do they end up being worth more than what they were purchased for? In other words, and this may not be a good analogy or an example, but if you go to the store and buy your favorite brand of chip or whatever it is that you like, and you get it out to the car and open the bag and see it's only one chip in it, do you start the car up and go home at that point, or do you go back in there and ask for your money back? You get what I'm driving at here?
Well,
you know what I'm saying? How are they worth?
Yeah.
How are they worth $1 billion?
I do. So, if you can, I don't recall. If you have, do you have the revenue numbers for those 3 years?
No, I don't. Unfortunately.
Okay.
I was trying to pull them up here, but it's go ahead.
This is where, to your point, I mean, we can go a little further up north, and you could say a winless Lions team, right?
Right.
How could they be worth $1?
Yeah, right.
Let alone, potentially, like you said, $1 billion. The first and foremost, when we were breaking down that total salary cap, and we mentioned, so years and years ago, before the NFL and the I think it was I can't remember which president specifically, but before you could see games nationally that were out of market, this is what inflated or began the inflation of the TV revenue. Right away, that figure alone per team is going to give you a healthy nest egg, if you will, regardless of your record. Secondly, when I mentioned before, about 40% of the team revenue comes from those folks in attendance. So one of the biggest pitfalls I use the Lions as a very good example, because for years fans wanted something different. They wanted an alternative to get through to the ownership that they were fed up. And the only way that could be done, and they were going through the ticket numbers on local radio stations, etc., and they were still selling out. Mm. So despite that, you got to remember a lot of the companies that again, the corporate side of things is driving those numbers, because again, you have the official tissue and toilet paper of your particular NFL franchise, all the way down to the the ketchup and mustard. So all of those have a number associated with them for that particular title, no matter how good or how bad the team is. Now, when it comes to valuations of any organization, it is always 5x what their actual revenues are. So when you start hearing $1 billion, it doesn't sound that far-fetched that, say, a decade ago, before this huge TV deal, and it may have been a huge TV deal, with the existing one that was, back then, but you're talking about a team that was making about $250 million. So you settle on, all right, well, here's 4X. You're going to make this back in 5 years. So Jimmy Haslam's made his money. Yeah.
You know what else is interesting? I've just found something. I pulled something up just to add a little bit more, to get a little bit more in depth, or add a little more detail to the whole Randy Lerner Haslam selling of the Browns. In the 1990s, Carmen Policy, we all know who Carmen Policy is, right? Or was introduced to Al Lerner. Now, of course, Al is the one who bought the Browns initially from Art Modell. Al Lerner was introduced to Carmen Policy introduced Al Lerner. Was introduced to Al Lerner, by Dennis Swanson of ABC Sports. Swanson, of course, was friends with Al Lerner. Policy's daughter, Carmen Policy's daughter, that is, was looking to work in television. A casual conversation about Policy's daughter with Swanson led to Swanson later telling Al Lerner, if you are serious about getting the Browns, you need to call Carmen Policy. So Policy and Al Lerner combined forces. They emerged as the group that won the bidding war for the Browns in 1999. Do you know what the price was? No? Maybe? $530 million. And this article I found here says, keep that in mind as you read this discussion of the sale to Haslam. $530 million in 1999. Now I don't know, again, Double J, you are the numbers guy, so to speak. You're the numbers guy. $530 million the Browns were worth in 1999. That's what Al Lerner purchased the Browns for. And of course, when Haslam got them, they were worth $1 billion. But in between that, they'd had how many losing seasons? So help me to understand, Double J. You know what I mean? How is it that they go from being bought for $530 million to being worth $1 billion, but the product on the field, and believe me, I'm right here in Cleveland. I'm telling you right now, throughout those lean years, so to speak, folks would show up the gate. Folks would show up early in the season when it was still nice outside, but by the time the fifth week of the season, from 1999 all the way up until here recently, for the most part, once you got into the fifth and sixth games of the season, the Browns' season was already over. So people would not go into the games after the first month or so. You get what I mean?
Yeah, but Jay, here's and I'm telling you right now, it was the same problem. That just because they weren't showing up, the tickets were purchased. Otherwise, what you would have seen a lot of then, actually you would have seen very little of. You would have seen very little of the Browns themselves locally. There would have been what's known as local TV blackout. That would have taken place unless the game was a sellout. It does not matter, in my best rock voice, if 5 people showed up and actually attended the game, those tickets were sold.
Okay, so let me read a little further here, and then before we move on to something else, because this is actually very, very interesting. I wasn't looking to get this deep into it, but it's fine. Al Lerner bought the Browns for $530 million, so Randy Lerner would nearly double the investment if he could secure the price of $1 billion. In 1998, the NFL was putting the Browns expansion franchise up for an auction conducted by Goldman Sachs. I was at an NFL owners meeting at the Dallas Airport Hyatt Hotel. I talked to several owners about the Browns situation, and at one point, a few of us in the media chatted with Alex Spanos, owner of the San Diego Chargers, about what should be the price of the expansion team. Remember, the higher the price, the more each team received. It was going to be divided into 30 parts. So that's how they do that, huh? Every team getting its share except Art Modell and the Baltimore Ravens. $1 billion is not unfair, said Spanos. I know it's worth $1 billion. I don't know if anyone will pay it. In 1998, the NFL owners made it clear they were interested in one thing: the most money. As Tampa Bay Bucks owner Malcolm Glazer said, it will go to the highest bidder. Now let me read that last part. In 1998, the NFL owners made it clear they were interested in one thing, and that was the most money. As Tampa Bay Bucks owner Malcolm Glazer said, it will go to the highest bidder. Al Lerner, of course, recognized that, and as he told us in the media, this is the Cleveland media, of course, the owners will see a number they like or bid, they like best, and decide that person is brilliant. And here are a few facts from the summer of 1998 when all this went down, when the NFL, of course, was seriously trying to build up competition between the various ownership groups bidding on the Browns. In 93, Carolina and Jacksonville had paid $140 million to become expansion teams. 5 years later, the NFL realized that was too cheap. By 1998, each NFL team was to receive about $75 million annually in national TV revenue. Number 3, Browns fans had bought more than 50,000 season tickets and 90 of 116 available luxury suites for a team with no owner, no coach, and no players. And don't forget all those fans being forced to purchase the dreaded PSL, the personal seat license. Okay, they weren't forced, but if you wanted a season ticket, you also paid extra for a PSL. And then, no, not lastly, excuse me, there's 2 more points here. The main groups bidding on the Browns were Larry and Charles Dolan, Howard Milstein, and Al Lerner. Others, such as former Tribe owner Dick Jacobs and Bart Wolstein, had dropped out or were eliminated by the NFL. And then, in retrospect, Al Lerner was probably the best man bidding. Larry Dolan, of course, is an honorable man and a solid owner of the Cleveland Indians, but he was connected to Charles Dolan, whose son James has been a disaster as an owner of the New York Knicks. Charles Dolan would have been the main owner of the Browns. And this is Terry Pluto. Okay, I didn't even see who wrote the article. I remember I talked to you about the book called False Start. Well, that's him. He said, when I was writing False Start, Common Policy told me that Al Lerner nearly dropped out of the bidding. Lerner was appalled by the raw greed of the other owners, how they seemed to have little interest in what ownership group was best for Cleveland. In the end, Policy convinced Lerner to stay in the bidding and bid high, because in a few years the franchise would be worth more. The bidding became a media event. Yeah, right. The winner was Lerner, of course, at $530 million. The Dolan family was second at $525 million. The issue, of course, was decided on September 7th, 1998. They gave the Browns 1 year and 5 days to prepare for the September 12th, 1999 season opener. The $530 million price tag became the highest amount paid at that time for any team in professional sports. The highest had been $350 million paid by Rupert Murdoch's Fox Group for the Los Angeles Dodgers in March of '98. The highest previous price for an NFL team was $250 million for the Minnesota Vikings. Double J, what are we talking about here? You get what I'm saying?
This is what I keep going back to. I'm going to show you. So, and the operating income, again, operating income, meaning I open my doors, I'm selling hot dogs, pizza, alcohol, whatever you want. The Dallas Cowboys, your Dallas Cowboys, $425 million. Now, they are the mecca of, the crown jewel of the NFL in terms of the business side of things. The Atlanta Falcons, on the other hand, only $38 million in operating income. So there is a huge disparity, and this is what I was referring to before. So when you say, well, how is Cleveland able to do this? When you look at the revenue by team, the Cowboys are at $980 million in 2019 before the pandemic. So these are pre-pandemic numbers, but let's see.
So wait.
We'll go to Cleveland.
Are you telling me the Browns are worth more than the Cowboys?
No.
Oh.
The Cowboys, I said, are your crown jewel. The revenue per year in 2019
the revenue. Okay,
was $900.
gotcha.
Yep. They made $980 million in 2019. Now, you go further down that list, and you can find teams like the Minnesota Vikings at $448 million. Now, that's just your top 18 there. So, we can keep kind of going lower and lower here. The Lions, as an example, at $411 million. So Cleveland's at $431 million. So when you ask, how are they worth $1 billion? Right there, they're generating almost $500 million annually.
Yeah.
So to that ownership group that says, I want to buy a fancy new toy, well, that toy it might as well be a printing press of money, because these teams cash out. And to your point about how horrible the product on the field is, and this is why I said the league is based on parity, which we all know, we all understand, and yet we are all still fans of it. We're okay. We have accepted that what the Patriots have done defied the entire concept of the league. And what the harsh reality is, your franchise and fandom is in limbo off the decision making of really a handful of select individuals, many of which you don't last long enough to even see really the fruits of their labor because of the demands of that same fan base to succeed by any means necessary.
Yeah. All I know is at the end of the day, I think we're seeing a changing of the guard. It's going to have to be something here with these, especially, because it's a quarterback-driven league. If all these quarterbacks
Well, I'm going to say this.
want out.
Be careful what you wish for, because if that changing of the guard it comes by way of not paying that position, well, first and foremost,
I don't know. Can you
who's
not?
gonna get
It's too. I don't know if you can afford to do that. Too much hinges on. If it's a quarterback-driven league, then how does the latter, what you just said, how is that synonymous then? How can you do? It seems like you'd have to do one or the other. If you do the latter or what you just mentioned, then that's going to be bad for business.
Well, you could say that, but remember, you brought up those 3 years, and I'm sure you could have brought up a whole heck of a lot more.
Oh boy,
of a underwhelming dog pound.
Yeah.
And that underwhelming dog pound was still a cash cow.
Yeah.
So, regardless if it's the death of the fullback, the introduction of the forward pass, or the revolution of a new position outside of the court, if it's at the expense of the quarterback, Jay, the teams will be there to live through all of the trials and tribulations of it, and the revenues will be there, will follow suit, unless it is just a true disaster. And it would have to be a hurricane that just sat over the league, for years for it to truly do that, for it to have any kind of impact. Remember, this is the same league that said, "Oh, hey, Colin Kaepernick, you're a quarterback, and you're gone. We don't agree. See ya. We'll pay you, but we'll pay you to go away.
Yes,
and don't talk about it."
Yes.
So, if the league wants to change it, remember, this is the good old boys network. We only got to get 32 people to get along.
Yeah, well. So then I guess, why do we not question all of the other assets or facets to this whole NFL, professional sports franchise or entities or whatnot, but we always first and foremost question the player and what the player is worth? You get what I'm saying?
Because, yeah, but here's the difference. There's that age-old concept. We talked about guns and butter indirectly here. But at the same time, what we've also indirectly brought up is fame versus fortune. The reason why we're talking about the players, because the players are the ones on TV on Sunday. The owners generally MIA, unless they're Jerry Jones, who wants the best of both worlds. Most of the owners are invisible. You may see a face of a general manager on Madden, and you may know the owners by name, but chances are you wouldn't be able to really point them out of a lineup for the most part. I'm sure right now if I were to say, hey, can you point out, here's a group of middle-aged, white dude, can you tell me which one owns the Utah Jazz? You probably wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen snippets of Jeffrey Lurie and a few other. Tom Benson, former Saints owner. I forget the Maras and with the Giants, but you're right. For the most part, the owners are not front and center, of course, like the players are. That's why I say there's a manifest aspect and a latent aspect to any and everything, and I'm just not one of those ones. And I don't just go off of appearances or the first thing I see. I got to pull that curtain back, or dig under there and see. But it's all good. I'm looking forward to see how this thing plays out. But I think at the quarterback position, we are seeing some kind of changes. To what the end result those changes might be, I don't know. But this is definitely, as you mentioned before, definitely unprecedented. and I'm looking forward to see how things shake out going forward. You listening to the Shop Report with Barbershop J and Double J today. No Brother Rich or D Gully. Okay, Double J. Did you hear what Paul Finebaum said about Deion Sanders in Jackson State? Oh, did I lose you? Sorry about that. I don't know why you keep going out there, buddy. Well, whether you did or didn't, I'll just read here. Paul Finebaum, and I'm calling this foul-mouthed Finebaum. For the most part, you know, Paul Finebaum, excuse me, say that fast 2 times. Finebaum is, for the most part, I respect his opinion. But like I keep saying to people, again, when having these sports debate, it seems to me that the average person who follows sports, a lot of the ones I talk to, they seem to give all of the weight to who is saying whatever's being said, as opposed to whatever is being said and whether or not if it makes sense. So, yes, I listen to Paul on occasion, but not because it's Paul, but because the things that he says most often than not, they make sense. Well, what he said about Deion Sanders, I'm in total disagreement with. And there's a few other people who commented on the post I put up on Facebook. They are in agreement with me or in disagreement with Paul as well. And if you're not familiar with, I know you are, Double J, but for our listeners out there, if you're not familiar with what Paul Foul-Mouthed Finebaum said, Deion Sanders is using Jackson State as a stepping stool. Double J, do you agree with that?
You know, I would certainly hope not. You know, we've been on this program specifically, and I think we're, you know, on an island, and oftentimes, you know, we kind of pride ourselves with that, but with this particular stance, when it came to what the HBCUs were in the past, what they were able to accomplish with 45, you incorporate some additional things socially that reemphasize and just in the what we would call the ecosystem of the NCAA, that said, you know, they have an opportunity here. And especially when you think of both the game of football as well as basketball, specifically basketball for me, because there's just simply less players needed to field a quality team. There just seemed like, you know, if you the same concept we took from a moment ago with the ownership, and if you really want to hurt them, you hurt their pockets. And how do you hurt their pockets? Well, from a fan standpoint, we said, well, you don't go to the games and you certainly don't buy the ticket. So by doing that, we talked about those revenues. They'll feel it. If not from one game, they'll feel it through a season and maybe, you know, begin to reevaluate some things. So to Paul Finebaum's point, his fingers are crossed that's exactly what Deion Sanders' motives are. And he wants to plant that seed now. Because what that does is to every kid, every student athlete that is in their junior or senior year that's being invited, right now I believe it's all virtual, but being invited to that Zoom call with him versus Nick Saban or Jim Harbaugh or Dabo Swinney, Ryan Day, just for the sake of doing so. He is hoping that the moment one of those bigger gigs, traditional gigs, the blue bloods of the NCAA football space, says, you know, Deion, we like what you did there. We think you could do it here, and we have more resources than that particular university. This is where it is going to come down to head versus heart. Because you're right, Prime has influence. It doesn't matter. He is all good when it comes to the character side of identifying with the student athlete.
But you know what, though?
But what Paul Finebaum is hoping is that just in case it isn't, for these first few years, please don't come poaching in the SEC country.
Yeah,
because he has that type of capability. And that is what he's hoping, because ultimately that is where the product suffers. We talked about revenues, et cetera.
Yeah.
If Deion Sanders is able to be a trendsetter here, like Deion Sanders can be, and like we can see, we've seen it, I would say, on the collegiate basketball side, there are more kids that are signing letters of intent with HBCUs. And like I said, I would love to see them crash that party. Yeah. But Deion, on the other hand, years ago, well, wait a minute. We've talked about Eddie Robinson.
I know.
We've talked.
Right, that's where I was going.
This sounds like ancient history to these kids, to the youth, that don't realize how darn good those teams actually were not that long ago. And even if you want to take it a step even further back.
You talking about HBCU teams?
That's correct.
Okay.
And to take it even a step further back, the other motives that forced a lot of these current blue bloods to change how they recruited and who they recruited and where they recruited. Whether that was your Alabama with Bear Bryant, afraid to show his bare behind by getting spanked, or that was the Cowboys head coach while he was in Miami and going to those high schools in Dade County.
But let me
all of these things.
But let me
add
ask.
up.
Let me. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Ain't no question. But let me throw this out here at you. With what Finebaum is saying about Deion Sanders, and not to pick on him, but I'm gonna use Nick Saban. What if Deion were to do that? What would Deion have done any different than a Nick Saban? And why is it? As my question would be, if I were in front of Paul, why is that? If Deion were to do that, why is that something worth mentioning? But when Nick Saban did it, and it was, the conversation surrounding Nick Saban when he did it, if it was some backlash, so to speak, or some venom, it died down very quickly, and he was lauded as for being a great coach, and not necessarily vilified for using whatever school he was at currently as a stepping stone to somewhere else.
Well, that's a very good point, because you see it everywhere. You literally see it everywhere. Matt Painter, Purdue head coach for the last 16 years, came from Purdue, played under Gene Cady, but on that coaching staff was ultimately a future Illinois head coach in Steve Lavin. He had to go into the back of the line, so he ended up going to Southern Illinois. Did what he had to do, formed a winner, and then, it just worked out that his dream job opened up. That's just that, and that's a smaller level. You see it countless times. Urban Meyer started out at Utah.
Yeah, don't even get me started on him.
Jim Tressel.
Yep, Youngstown State.
Youngstown State.
Yep, Youngstown State. Sure did. Yeah, sure did. Yeah, I just.
But it's only a problem when Deion Sanders does it. And this is why I'm telling you, I'm not going to go as far as to say it's racially motivated.
Well, you don't have to, because what's already understood need not be explained to some degree. But go ahead.
But at the same time, I'm telling you now, as a man that is paid
it sounds
by
like
the
a double
SEC,
standard, though. Even if you don't want to call it racism, it sounds like a doggone double standard.
Well, again, we've given you countless, in both sports, I've given you countless examples of how you do things. You go and look at Ohio State's current coach in basketball right now, came from Butler. You look at Brad Stevens,
exactly.
came from Butler.
Exactly.
This is, but this is why I'm telling you he's identified as a threat right now because he has what Nick Saban could never have, which is swag.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what else he has?
He
went out and did the darn thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In 2 sports.
Exactly, yeah.
He defied the odds. He went against the man, and he did what Deion wanted to do, what Prime wanted to do.
Okay.
He can speak to things that a high school parent and a high school kid could only dream of.
Okay, so in other words, so what you're saying is the recruitment trip to a prospective talent with Deion sitting on the other couch is a whole lot more influential, for lack of a better word or term, as opposed to or than it would be for Nick Saban. Even though Nick Saban is good at recruiting, it's one thing. If you're management and I recruit you, okay, I might have a good spiel. But if you've been in the trenches and I recruit you, I can tell you things from experience that no other guy can say to you from experience. And I'm not saying Nick Saban didn't play football or whatever at some point, but I get what you're driving at. The level of Deion's impact is far greater on a recruitment or going after a possible recruit than would be Nick Saban's in that case. So Deion could invariably do at the D1 level, because there was some talk about if he was to go, Paul in his article said that Deion might try to get to Florida State. Deion could invariably do single-handedly what the D1 schools did to the HBCUs. Deion get to Florida State, he getting all the top recruits. Ain't gonna be no more Clemsons and Bamas and Ohio States. Everybody gonna want to play for Deion. I get what you're going, or at least that's what it sounded like you was going with that.
Well, and that's why I said it would be an absolute shame. And this is where I'm grateful and thankful that Deion is Deion. He's someone that I don't believe can be persuaded by dollar signs. He's already been there and done that. And he's somebody that is on record as have learned from those compensation-motivated moves.
Mm-hmm. Or compensatory experiences.
Yep. And so when you factor that into the harsh reality, that is the climate and pulse of society primarily throughout these past 4 years, and for many, we would say our entire lifetimes, and potentially generations, you have a chance to flip the script and to truly be a trend center in a way that would leave you in the record books that has never been done before. And you would force their hand to truly change things. Because, again, what they would have to do, Jay, when you think back of 2 summers ago and we brought up, what we consider kind of financial fair play and rev share and all these different realistic and truthfully just the student athlete being robbed. This would force their hand.
Yeah.
If he were to succeed here, because these programs and boosters, ultimately we can't deny that these major universities have deep pockets.
Oh, it's no question. Oh, my gosh. We talked about this once before on the show. The NCAA as a whole made, $8 billion last year? So, yeah.
Exactly. So you thought the NFL was a nice nest egg.
Yeah.
The NC2A is I would argue it's a little bit more comfy than they are.
Yeah, they sitting a little bit there. They sitting real purty.
So with that in mind, if Deion were to succeed, that would be the next logical step. I know how these folks think, and it would impact the bottom line because when those jersey sales are no longer going to athlete number 1 on Alabama and they're going to Jackson State, or they're going to Grambling. They're going to schools that, again, we know what those figures look like. Even from the NBA level, you can see what LeBron's jersey sales are annually. You're telling me right now that you couldn't get at least a quarter of that type of revenue by way of those same student athletes just because they opted to an HBCU instead? I would say horse manure.
Yeah, come on now. You know how it is. The system is not broken. It was built this way. But let me add in here a few more tidbits of what Finebaum Paul said in relation to this whole Deion thing. He said, I think he, of course, being Deion, wants to take a swing at big-time college or the NFL, whether it's his alma mater or somewhere else. But more than anything, it's a marketing tool. He's getting coverage, and he wasn't getting all that much before that. Can he sustain himself, his ego, and his desire for bigger and better by being the coach at Jackson State? Your thoughts on Mr. Finebaum?
Well, bear with me here. I'm going to take one more chop at that tree there that Paul is trying to knock down. That is Deion Sanders. Trying to take him out at the kneecaps. Again, he's already doing the character assassination there, saying this is nothing but an ego boost for him. Trying to play on the Deion of old. Talking about he wasn't getting this much coverage. Maybe Paul doesn't have the NFL Network there in the South. Because Deion's on TV all the time. This isn't about stroking his ego. And this is what I mean about this being a genuine threat to the system that is known as the NC2A.
But it's about time, though.
The mafia, as Brother Rich calls it.
Right. It's about time for the system to be rearranged and defamed and dethroned. You know?
Oh, without a doubt.
It's about time.
But the reality of it is, you know, if this is where we bring up history and we talk about literacy and we talk about, you know, comprehension on the program. This is where these kids don't know it, and you know they don't know it. They're looking at, you know, and for very good reason. But I want to point out to them in case that there's 5 that are listening, that if you go and look at all of the schools that are represented in the NFL right now, you're going to be very surprised. Because it's not your blue blood schools that have all of the players in the NFL. That's not the case. You have, you know, I could bring up Roberto Garza, who played for University of Texas San Antonio.
Right.
And there are players from all over the place. Jay Cutler, of course, went to Vanderbilt. There's countless players that don't go to your traditional powerhouses that succeed. That ultimately, at some point here, it does come down, as much as it comes down to system, it comes down to willpower. Tom Brady is a very good example of that. Despite where he came from, he barely even played there. To go to Jackson State, and this is where it would get interesting, Jay, because I'm telling you now, the same way we brought up, the NFL can do what they want. Now, if Deion's successful and they have a kid that tears stuff up, because I'm going to use a friend of mine, Adrian Peterson, not the one you're thinking of, not Minnesota, the one who came from Georgia Southern.
Okay. Why do I know that name? What's his number? He was a running back. Believe
That's right.
it or not.
He
Yeah.
set a division. Yeah, he set a record.
Yeah. Yeah, he set a record
He was
for
still
like
able.
touchdowns or something, rushing yards in a season or something or another.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
I saw that a few months back.
so this is an individual that had not only a speech disability,
right,
but went to a smaller university and still found his way in the Super Bowl, where he would ultimately, unfortunately, they would succumb to Peyton Manning in the first go-around. But would the NFL say, you know what, these Jackson State boys, you better not take them in the top 10?
What? Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be smart. I hope the NFL wouldn't do nothing. That would be stupid. Because you taking a guy based in the top 10 based on what value you think he may add to your franchise or whatever. You know what I mean? And then, of course, that whole marketing and all that stuff after he's drafted and all that, plays a part of it or whatever. But I would not say don't, if that makes any doggone sense, don't draft Jackson State guy in the top 10. That would be very asinine for the NFL to do that. I wouldn't put it past them, but it's a changing of that's what I'm trying to say. It's 2021. Whether folks like it or not, there are things that are changing that we see taking place contrary to what we all knew as a norm. It's inevitable because what we see as a norm for the most part has been foul in this country. Let's be realistic, okay? And this just, I don't know if you're into that universe and all of that, the balance, chi and Chinese and yin and yang and all of that, but to some degree, yeah, I am, most definitely. And I'm telling you right now, you can't keep, they say you reap what you sow, so to speak. Well, the powers that be are sowing or reaping what's been sown throughout the years. Probably even before, and this has been brewing since before you and I was even born. It's just coming. It's just a time and a place. It's just a time of coming. Where the walls of Jericho they're coming and tumbling down. You know what I mean? We just have to sit back and hopefully that we still standing once the walls are done crumbling. You're listening to Barbershop. J and Double J, Brother Richard and D Gully are off today because I thought they was going to call in, but hey, they didn't, and the show must go on. Double J, you and I are familiar, of course, with Dr. J, okay? But are you familiar with a Rucker, that is Rucker Park record in connection with the doc? Are you familiar?
No, this one I want to hear.
Okay. Dr. J brought the greatest crowd in the history of Rucker Park to Rucker Park. And the reason why I picked this particular subject, and I was hoping that Brother Rich and Gully was in on this one in particular, because I had all of you all in mind when I came across this. Well, Basketball Network, of course, is a group I'm in on Facebook, and they come up with nice little basketball tidbits and information every now and again that I think should be shared, because they do a pretty good job of it. They do. But in particular, I picked this as a note or a PSA to all of them folks out there who on the Facebook talking sports and using just statistics or highlights to diminish or devalue the league prior to what we seeing now, and in particular them folks calling them guys back in the day, my day, plumbers. For all you folks out there who love to call them guys from once upon a time the plumbers, let me read to you a little something about the ultimate plumber, okay? Because the conversation is such that them guys then couldn't play now. Why? All right? Hey, like I keep saying, and I'm going to continue to say, there's nothing wrong with fandom. But at some point, all I want to know is when you're going to allow reality to get a seat at the table. Let me read you this article by Basketball Network about Dr. J. And again, the title is, and this is by Harry, this article was written March 20 of 2018 by Arthur Harry, Volarevic, Volerovic. Excuse me if I'm butchering your name there, Harry, but I appreciate you giving the show giving us a show topic for the day. And again, Dr. J brought the greatest crowd in the history of Rucker Park. Thanks to the NBA's original documentary, The Doctor, which aired in 2013, which I did see, we were able to get a glimpse. And that's what I keep trying to tell people who use highlights as the end-all, be-all. Highlights only give you a glimpse. And then they really are misleading, because if I'm trying to paint a bad narrative, I'll find all the highlights that would fit my narrative. They either can make a player look all good or all bad. So you can't just go off highlights alone. But I saw Doc. I didn't see him at the Rucker, but I saw Doc. And when I read this article about the Rucker, what I saw from Doc, absolutely. Yes, absolutely, 100%. I'm all in agreement with it being absolutely true. So we were able to get a glimpse of Dr. J playing at the famed Rucker Park. Since the 50s, Rucker Park in Harlem hosted summer tournaments that brought names as big as Will Chamberlain and Connie Hawkins to the blacktop to play a version of the game where style was as essential as the substance. I wonder where we heard that before. Maybe not worded that way, but wonder where we heard that before. All style and no substance. Oh, okay, got you. Tom Hoover, who had played for the Knicks, had never heard of him being Dr. J, of course, but soon enough, the kid named Julius was doing things that no one at the Rucker would ever forget. I don't know if it was UJJ, but somebody had put a post up on Facebook about a week or so ago about what's the Mecca of New York. You know, when it comes to basketball, is it Madison Square Garden or something or another? And I mentioned my weighed in and said it's the Rucker. No disrespect to the Knicks and what they meant to the league, especially in years past. You know, when the Garden was the Garden and so on and so forth. But I think the reason why New York is considered the basketball mecca is because of the Rucker. And anybody that was a somebody on the NBA circuit, hoop circuit in general, you wanted to be. Matter of fact, it was guys who got more adulation and more shine and more credit, street cred, or whatever the case you want to call it, or case may be, for having played at the Rucker versus playing in the NBA. They're like, man, you play in the NBA? Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, man, you played at the Rucker. What? Guys were jumping about the chair. I'm just telling you. So, doing things that no one at the Rucker would ever forget. We played him the first game, and they kept saying, you wait till Julius gets in. You wait till Julius gets in. And I'm like, who's Julius? I'm in the NBA. What do I care about Julius? Just like some of these new NBA fans who disregard and disrespect and are dismissive towards the history of the game. Like, what do I care? Like, I don't need to know that. Yeah, you do. So, this is Tom Hoover again talking. Man, he came down one time, and I had the angle on him. But he dunked the ball so bad, the ball hit me in the top of the head. My teeth fell out on the ground, and the crowd roared. That, of course, helped build his reputation, and again, his, in this case, being Dr. J. Keep in mind now that Irving was a high school kid going against NBA players. Like I keep telling these new NBA dudes, when they talk about they boy Bron, I get it. Like nobody else ever did that from high school. Man, stop it. Know your history. There's a whole lot of other dudes that came from high school that would give you the business. But again, keep in mind that Irving was a high school kid going against NBA players. You'd be happy if you could hold your own. But Irving did a lot more than that. He dominated. Yeah, he dominated. Julius Irving brought the greatest crowd in the history of the Rucker Pro League. People were up in the trees, sitting on branches. Everywhere you looked around, there were people. This is where the legend of Dr. J started. But there was just one thing left for Julius to earn at the Rucker, his nickname. And, of course, Irving was called a bunch of different nicknames. Lil Hawk, as for Connie Hawkins, of course, among others. And he even once corrected the announcers and told them was not to be called the Little Hawk. That's Connie Hawkins. In other words, again, like everybody want to do now, man, he the next. No, Connie Hawkins was Connie Hawkins, and Dr. J said, no, that's Connie Hawkins, man. You know, all right? Some of his nicknames were Little Hawk, The Claw, and Black Moses. After being fed up with all the nicknames, he told everyone, if you want to call me anything, call me Doctor. That's what Dr. J said. So naturally, everybody started calling him Dr. J, and of course, the rest is history. Double J, your thoughts on Doc bringing the largest crowd ever to the Rucker. Did I lose you? Oh, wow, I did. Hold on here. I don't know what's going on with today's recording, people. Y'all got to bear with us, but for whatever reason, I keep losing my only co-host that showed up today. But he's back. There it is, Double J. Did you, of course, hear me reading the rest of the article, or do I need to go over it again?
No, I heard it loud and clear. And, first, I just, the moment you brought this topic up, and you brought up the fact that he brought the most people out. And the reason instantly I kind of was I had this stunned look on my face. Not because of how good he was or isn't, as you pointed out, the common narrative, but a very good example of how much weight and merit that statement has. Because what does resonate with these kids is in the today BA is the name Kobe Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
And that same individual has also been to the Rucker.
Yes, he has.
So the fact of the matter that in an era where the technology wasn't there.
Oh, it would have been
and
off the
he was
it would have
still
been off the
able to
chain
do
had it
that.
been Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff back then. Oh my gosh.
I couldn't believe what was that when you brought that up a moment ago. I had to take a few moments because, again, as you kind of point out, and this is something I was going to ask you, as you stated, that Rucker is really the mecca of New York in basketball, and why basketball is as important to New York City has everything to do with street ball. But why isn't street ball loved back?
Well, when you got to elaborate on that. When you say love back, you mean by the people?
No, by the league. Think about it. You mentioned.
Well,
you look at guys like Dr. J. Sure. You have league stars like Kevin Durant or Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
That would go there, and they were household names at that point. Very similar to the story that you're talking about today. And, we've very well known kind of the culture around Rucker Park and the teams and the seriousness that was involved in those games.
Yeah.
And going back to even the And One mixtape days of guys like
Professor and Hot Sauce, yeah. Half man, half amazing. Yeah, Escalade.
You never, rest in peace, and you never felt like it was inclusive to them, despite
I got you.
despite the impact that they truly have to the game itself. Because as you pointed out, I don't believe the game of basketball would be as big as it is without that, without a Rucker Park.
There's no question, without the Rucker Park in particular. And let me point out a few things. One, I played at a lot when I was making my heyday in playing. I played at a lot of parks throughout the United States. I played, don't forget the names of them. Lord, my goodness, my senility is kicking in. But in California, played in Arkansas, when I lived in Texas, played at the Rucker in New York. Played at it was a park in Colorado too that's pretty good, and of course here in Ohio, played at the 24 the Run and Shoot down in Atlanta. That's really all I can think of right now. But that the playgrounds growing up, guys were not because when I at Woodhill, that's our park here in Cleveland where it used to be. A few NBA, Cavs players. Roy Henson, I recall, used to come up all the time. But those guys they weren't afraid of getting hurt or afraid of messing up their NBA careers. They were just flat out hoopers. They had to get it in. He was a baller, you was a baller. If I get hurt, I get hurt playing in the game as opposed to, playing at the park. So man, I'm a hoop. I'm a hoop. If it's in your blood, if you love the sport, you're gonna find a way to play the sport regardless. And you sometimes forget your NBA obligations. I guess I don't know, but back then, that's how you made your name. Going to the local parks and whatnot. And let me say, when I say the Mecca, or of the basketball universe, the epic center or the heartbeat, it's New York, and it's been like that. It's just established that it was New York. And again, most people thought it was because of the Knicks, with Willis Reed coming out and being injured. And they won the title in '73, and all that, Spike Lee and the Reggie Miller choke, and all of that is adds to the lore of the Garden and so on and so forth. But again, you made the Rucker was the Rucker was the Rucker. The Rucker is what makes New York the Mecca. More so, in my opinion, than the Garden and them infamous Knicks teams or whatnot. Even though, of course, again, they do get their credit. But nowadays, guys have it. Well, teams are writing in contracts. Guys can't do because of course the amount of monies that guys are being paid. You gotta go to the Rucker now, and twist his ankle or something or another like that. The NBA, his NBA team is not going to be too happy about that or whatnot. But like I said, man, some guys just didn't care. And I don't know if Kobe ever had it in his. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But Kobe was one of them dudes, man. You could play every NBA arena with all due respect to him. But in them certain circles, yeah, folks will give you okay. If you ain't played at the Rucker. That's all I'm trying to tell you. The Rucker was that park. You said I played at the Rucker. Folks looked up like, oh, word. You know what I mean? But hey, I played at the Boston Garden. Oh, okay, it's all good. I see you. I'll check you out maybe next week. But tell Bobby and Jack, man, JoJo going down to the Rucker, man, he's dropping everything and going down there to see him. Like I said, man, he brought the biggest crowd. And if you see in the documentary, that was actual footage of people sitting on buildings across the park. Anywhere you could find a spot to see the court that day the doc came up. Anybody and everybody. I wonder if that's probably the large. That crowd probably had to be maybe as large as an NBA arena crowd during the finals. I'm just saying. And we talking about a local playground. Man, the Rucker is forever etched in the annals of basketball lore in history, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, at the end of the day, kudos to my man, Dr. J. But I just wanted to bring that to the forefront. And like I said, I wish Brother Rich and Gully had been here to weigh in on that as well. But when I came up with that, this was for you all, as well as, these new BA and today BA basketball fans who think that the basketball didn't start until they was born, okay? That's why I'll never get over this whole idea of whatever player name, insert, fill in the blank, all time, whatever. How can you be all time and you ain't seen all of them? Is my question. Double J, I want to appreciate you, man. Go ahead. What you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, and this is what the parks like that made you as a player. You could be a legend in the game without ever setting foot inside of Madison Square Garden.
Exactly.
And to be most importantly, we talk a lot about these kids being, lacking on the defensive end and being afraid to get dunked on. And you could even argue the advancement and acceleration of the three-point shot, was largely once a specialty. And you could say, can those same people, are they afraid to go one-on-one with someone? And the Rucker, you had all of those eyes on you, and you didn't have a choice. If the rock is in your hand, you better not give it up.
I'm trying to tell you. But you know what, though?
And they will clear it out. If you get dunked on, go get them back. This is where lessons were learned.
Yeah.
And arguably a key component of the game itself is potentially at risk of being lost, and that's why I feel that the NBA should do the right thing and bring that heritage and culture that really gave merit to to the game that we see today, or in league that we have today.
Yeah, but the NBA is the same.
That was the foundation.
Yeah, but the NBA
I
is,
get it. There's no direct affiliation, but Jay, they got to do something, and by way of like the Hall of Fame.
yeah, but
They have to do something for these guys. To we all know, you and I know, what they did and how great they were, but these things that needs to be a national enshrinement in what they meant as ambassadors to the game of basketball. Even if it wasn't directly to the NBA itself, they still were playing the game of basketball.
okay, but again, we're talking about the NBA now. They two-faced it. Let's be honest, okay? They say one thing, and then they do something entirely different, all right? And one of those things is they talk about parity. But if you watch the NBA currently, do you really see parity in the NBA? No.
I see games that somebody will have a 20-point lead, and then somehow it finishes within 10 points. About every single night.
Yeah, the NBA. I'm with you though. I would love to see them pay homage to those legends who could have played in the NBA but didn't because they made a different choice that day, as opposed to the other guys who did. Yes, because it's all basketball. And to your point, the Basketball Hall of Fame is not called, unlike the NFL, the NBA Hall of Fame. It's called the Basketball Hall of Fame. So those guys are as much as intertwined as in the NBA game, or as the NBA game is, as to basketball, period, if I'm saying that correctly. Rayford Alston was one of the other guys we didn't mention who was a part of that and one mix who played for the Orlando Magic. And if I'm not mistaken, played on that Orlando Magic team that went to the finals, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he did. That beat the Cavs on the way to the finals. Yeah, he did. But, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of guys have said, nah, I couldn't say they was lying or not lying because, when the NBA, of course, comes dollars and contracts and such. But there was a lot of guys that said, man, I'd rather be known as a Rucker Park legend than being the 12th guy on the bench in the NBA. Okay. It just meant something to them guys that you can't put a price on. Were it known that you played at the Rucker or any other spot in the United States where that park was the park, especially the Rucker. And it was known by other guys, man, he played at the Rucker. It just carried along a certain respect that no other place from the park to the parquet you could have played carried. It just didn't. That's why I say the Rucker, with all due respect to MSG, Knicks, Phil Jackson, Pat Riley, Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, all of them, anybody, Dave DeBusschere, all of them guys, anybody you can think of, Ewing, anybody that you can think of that played in the Knicks uniform. Man, it's the Rucker that really sent things over the top. And on that note, it's been fun, but we got to run. We appreciate y'all for listening. Don't forget to check us out right here on Spreaker.com. Or you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And please give us a follow. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can hop on over to the shop's Facebook fan page. And if that don't work, Google it. For my mans, Double J, and all those who follow and support us, we say thank you. And lastly, we want to remind you all that the Shop Report is being powered by none other than the fine folks over at Rocket Digital Media. That is ROCKIT Digital Media, or digital.net. It's the one-stop shop for all your digital marketing needs. You can look them up on Facebook at RDM Detroit, or you can go to their website again, rocketdigital.net, and tell them BSJ sent you. Sorry about that. And remember, the next time y'all want to know what's really going on, man, come to the shop. Walk-ins are always welcome. Holla.
Bullseye.